Hello, I'm David Patterson. Am I a climate scientist? I need to sort that out first. Opinions differ on whether or not I am a climate scientist. I'm retired now, but my working life was with CSIRO, the Australian Science and Industrial Research Organisation. GCMs are officially global circulation models, but I prefer to refer to them as global climate models. This equation has been the core of my PhD, and a simplified version is also the core of global climate models. You probably know it as Newton's second law, force equals mass times acceleration. My work has only been about 3/4 mathematics. I've also been involved in the design and construction of specialist weather stations. Most of my friends are environmentalists. I need to explain what I mean by arguing from ignorance. In its most pernicious form, it is long-term effects may be deadly, so we mustn't do it. That's terrible because we can never know long-term effects in advance. Our ignorance is no excuse for opposition. Another more familiar version perhaps is better the devil you know than the devil you don't. But if the devil you know really is a devil, then it's much better to choose the devil you don't. Are you a climate skeptic? Perhaps you are and don't know it. Consider the following two statements. Do you agree with the first one? Do you agree with the second one? If you agree with either of those, then you really are a climate skeptic, whether you think you are or not. I've put this in a cartoon. Each of the different characters in my cartoons has a different opinion. Here are 3 different opinions, all skeptical. Determine the optimum rate of fossil fuel burning. And when you consider that, the Kyoto Protocol actually makes sense. So we set our atmospheric carbon dioxide to a high fixed level, watch the biosphere continue to grow, and watch the global temperature stabilize. How I became a climate skeptic. There have been 3 waves of crown of thorns through the barrier reef so far, and despite that, the southern 2/3 of the reef is healthier right now in the year 2022 than it has been since records began. The original Club of Rome report was written in 1968, published as a book in 1972. I first read it in 1974. It predicts a massive global catastrophe with billions of peoples, plants and animals dying, even with unlimited resources, pollution control, increased agricultural productivity and perfect birth control. So it appears to be a catastrophe that cannot under any circumstances be avoided. Scientifically approved apocalypses date back at least to the year 1859, where predatory fish entering the Mediterranean via the new Suez Canal were going to destroy fishing in the Mediterranean and plunge surrounding regions into economic ruin. Another example is in the year 1910, when scientists who had found cyanide in the tail of Halley's Comet predicted the deadly poisoning of Earth's atmosphere as we passed through its tail that year. Climate change is one of the most benign apocalypses ever invented. I believed in the scientific apocalypse of the Club of Rome, but continued, because I'm a skeptic, I continued to watch how well the predictions matched up with reality. At the moment, the cropped parts of Europe are actually declining in size because better crop strains have allowed food growth to more than keep pace with population, and because in Europe human fertility has declined quite considerably. When I first found the Club of Rome book, 1974, I noticed when they calculated that resources were supposed to run out. And here are the years. In 1983, gold was supposed to have run out. By the year 2005, aluminium was supposed to have run out. None of this has happened. We now know that even peak oil can't happen. Oil production in Australia peaked in the year 2000, so I was under the impression that peak oil was coming. But now there's no chance of peak oil within the next 200 years because of the successful mining of tar sands in Canada and shale oil in the USA. Summary so far. You may be a climate skeptic, even if you think you're not. Some science-supported apocalypses have already been debunked, and climate change is one of the mildest apocalypses ever invented. Back in 1989, when there were still scientists predicting that we were heading for a new ice age, I didn't believe that. I was so worried back in 1989 about global warming that I sold my house because it was only 2 meters above high tide level. It's still 2 meters above high tide level. To beat climate change, walk faster than 1 centimetre per year, and that takes into account the beach slope of 1 in 6. I read the first IPCC report and loved it. However, it omits quite a lot. Omission of any calculations of increased plant growth with increased carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide directly fertilizes plant growth, and carbon dioxide also happens to be the rate controlling factor for plant growth for most plants. And I'm going to be specific here and to say rate controlling factor for C3 plants. Now, C3 plants includes all trees, most shrubs, and quite a few grasses. Water as a gas is a more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. Water in clouds is a powerful cooler. The balance between the two is critical for maintaining stable temperatures. And the balance can be tipped by changes in man-made aerosols. In the second IPCC report, I found to my horror that the IPCC had made a factor of 5 error in the calculation. Oh well, the IPCC isn't infallible, and I must stress that this is not the main calculation. The MODIS cameras on NASA's NASA's Aqua and Terra satellites. What I expected to see in the data was not at all what was in the data. net growth of wild forests increased enormously between 2001 and 2016, with a flow-on positive effect up through the food chain. A hypothesis, and it remains a hypothesis, it's not proved, is that the worldwide atmospheric carbon dioxide increase was having a huge positive effect on forest growth and on phytoplankton growth as well. And it's worthwhile looking at these. These are from MODIS by NASA. First thing you'll notice is that the world plant growth in July 2001 is much lighter colour than world plant growth in 2016. So in just about every country, there's been an increase in the rate of forest growth worldwide. The grey areas here are no data because there's no vegetation. Forest growth increases across Asia. You can see this is so much darker than that. Europe, North and South America, all massive increases in forest growth, and even places like Madagascar, Indonesia, Australia. Kyoto Protocol was the first major political influence of the IPCC reports. There was a News in Science snippet in the New Scientist magazine that 2/3 of the IPCC scientists quit because they didn't believe that their results should be used for these particular political purposes. Operation of the IPCC changed radically after Kyoto, ignoring science data. Now, Morton's demon is the process of rejecting all data that disagrees with your worldview. And in the IPCC reports, it's set out as if it was a debate. The authors have, on one hand, put together the arguments that global climate change is good, and on the other hand, all the arguments that increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is bad. Okay? And then they've thrown away all the data saying that it's good and only published the data saying it's bad. That is a particularly bad example of Morton's demon. There are also other biases in the IPCC, such as the use of negative language. Now, negative language from Wayne's World is a deep philosophical discussion, not. And the IPCC used that as global warming causes an increase in storms, not. The first IPCC report found that 2/3 of global warming was due to carbon dioxide. This was later changed, but I wasn't aware until long after that that change was mathematical sleight of hand. The 95% included CFCs. So after CFCs were banned, the rate of global warming should have slowed. It didn't. So the mathematics involved here was wrong. Now let's come up to the most recent IPCC report. Here, For the first time, the IPCC has actually finally defined what climate change actually is. After decades of ignorance, because they never actually said what climate change was in the first place. They've thrown away the physical model linking atmospheric CO2 to climate change. And the reason they've thrown away the physical model is because the physical model says that CO2 does not cause a linear change in global warming. It has a logarithmic change in global warming. The IPCC says that there will be a slight increase in global rainfall and no significant increase in storms or droughts. This directly contradicts environmentalists' hype. Reef-building corals grow about 1 centimetre a year. Sea level rise is about 1.5 millimetres a year. Something's got to give. If we want to keep our corals growing at the current rate, sea levels have to rise. The first IPCC report to mention coral bleaching specifically said that coral bleaching was not caused by climate change. Coral grows. As coral grows, the water above it gets shallower. Shallow water heats up to high temperatures very quickly in the daytime, which causes the expulsion of algae, and this is known as coral bleaching. So coral bleaching is a direct consequence of coral growth. I've already mentioned that the IPCC report in 2021 has removed the physics from their model. It also, throughout the IPCC reports, positive effects are reported as if they were negative. Increasing atmospheric CO2 allows plants to use less water. This is a positive. But the IPCC misrepresents this as a negative. If you have thousands of data points, the correct way to report the statistics is either by use of mean and standard deviation or median and interquartile range. Giving the range between outliers gives a totally false impression of the accuracy. So whereas the IPCC reports the effect of the increased CO2 on plant growth as between -40% and +500%, that's meaningless. It's actually 60% plus or minus 10%, and a 60% increase in forest growth worldwide is enormous. In addition to misreporting that, they hide it about 2/3 of the way through the report in 2 or 3 different reports. Remember, change is inevitable except from a vending machine. Global warming is better than global cooling. Now for some cartoons. Here's another example of a positive effect that is misreported as a negative effect. The use of the words dead zone and eutrophication zone is completely misleading. In a river or estuary, yes. In the open ocean, no. These areas rich in phytoplankton are whale feeding grounds and biodiversity hotspots. The Baltic Sea, which was in a very bad way back in the 1970s, has now completely recovered thanks to reduced fertilizer wash-off. So what we're talking about here has nothing really to do with global warming and everything to do with fertilizer wash-off into the oceans, which is a completely different topic. The worst environmental disaster so far has to be agriculture, followed by China's war on the four pests, the mass spraying of insecticides and herbicides in jungle, and the bulldozing of swamplands. What we're told about in terms of environmental disasters, completely negligible by comparison. Quality of life is all important. I'll approve anything that improves the quality of life, not just for humans, but for all wild things. Sustainability is perpetual motion. Sustainability is not only impossible, but it's not what we should aim for. We mustn't design our factories to be perpetual motion machines. We design our factories to minimize input and minimize waste. And that's what we need to do with agriculture too. We need to minimize input and minimize waste. Although there has been an enormous increase in world forest growth between the years 2000 and the year 2016, this doesn't directly correlate with atmospheric CO2 increase. So you have to remain skeptical about the fact that this increase from 2001 up to the year 2000 up to the year 2017, a huge increase, but it doesn't necessarily depend on CO2. There may be some other factor involved that nobody knows about. This bottom cartoon is just saying that a lot of people write about climate change because it's really easy to get money to write about climate change. Coal can be used as a raw material substituting for crude oil if crude oil ever runs out, but it doesn't look like it's going to run out anyway. People with an open mind are very rare. This cartoon was written by a friend of mine on the web who calls himself Rev Dodgson. And it's a really good cartoon. I like it. What is the optimum level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? At a doubling of carbon dioxide, we have 60% better growth of forests, 35% increase in crop yields, a rate of sea level rise 6 times what it is now, which is the optimum for coral reef growth, a big increase in food chain in the sea, plants require less water to grow, slight increase in world water supplies, less frost, so double cropping and longer growing seasons for agriculture, more farmland becomes available, and no increases worldwide in either droughts or severe storms. And yes, I have references for this. Unfortunately, I've actually lost the reference for sea level rise for coral reef growth. Apologies for that. All right, well, I hope that you haven't got this on a small screen because this is very much worth studying in detail. By non-catastrophic environmental changes, I mean excluding the possibility of asteroid impact, excluding the possibility of global nuclear war. So the first order effects of environmental changes are better growth of forests, better growth of phytoplankton, global warming, ecosystem fragmentation, fewer fires, droughts and floods, species modifications and dispersal, improvement in the beauty of coasts and improvements in the environment around coasts and rivers, heating of shallow tropical waters due to coral growth, coral bleaching, variability, and as for the Milankovitch variations in the Earth's orbit around the Sun, nobody really knows what the consequences of that are. And there's an unknown cause for growth of deserts. I'll just give you an example. The southern growth of the Sahara is blocked by the tsetse fly. The tsetse fly keeps elephants and other animals away, which stops them from denuding the vegetation on the southern edge of the Sahara. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an anthropogenic effect. Anyhow, we've had the northward migration of civilization from Egypt up through Middle East, up through Europe, and now to North America and Russia. And northward growth of the Sahara has also led to bankrupting of southern Europe.